this computer.
Okay, so tonight we're going to be looking at Krishnamurti, his book, The First and Last Freedom. I'm going to be reading from chapter 21, Power and Realization. And in this chapter, he shares his observations on how to bring about a true inner revolution. How do we come to a genuine sense of realization?
Excuse me, psychological revolution, right?
Of course, darling, we're in a spiritual realm. We're not a group of anarchists secretly meeting to overthrow the government. They thought that was relatively clear, but just to be clear, we're talking about psychological revolution. This is not a call to the embattlements. Okay, so Mr. Krishnamurti says, one must first see the extraordinarily subtle activities of the me, of the mind. One must become aware of the ideas, beliefs, speculations, and put them all aside, for they are really deceptions, are they not? Others may have experienced reality, but if you have not experienced it, what is the good of speculating about it or imagining that you are, in essence, something real, immortal, godly? This is still within the field of thought, and anything that springs from thought is conditioned, is of time, of memory. Therefore, it's not real. If one actually realizes that, not speculatively, not imaginatively or foolishly, but if you actually see the truth that any activity of the mind in its speculative search, in its philosophical groping, any assumption, any imagination or hope is only self-deception, then what is the power, the creative energy that brings about this fundamental transformation? Now, in coming to this point, we have used the conscious mind. We have followed the argument. We have opposed or accepted it. We have seen it clearly or dimly. But to go further requires a mind that is quiet and alert, does it not? It is no longer pursuing ideas, because if you pursue an idea, there is the thinker following what is being said, and so you immediately create duality. If you want to go further into this matter of fundamental change, is it not necessary for the active mind to be quiet? Surely it is only when the mind is quiet that it can understand the enormous difficulty, the complications of the thinker and the thought as two separate processes. The experiencer and the experienced, the observer and the observed. Revolution, this psychological, creative revolution in which the me is not, comes only when the thinker and the thought are one, when there is no duality, such as the thinker controlling thought. And I suggest it is this experience alone that releases the creative energy, which in turn brings about a fundamental revolution by breaking up the psychological me. We know the way of power, power through domination, power through discipline, power through compulsion. Through political power, we hope to change fundamentally, but such power only brings further darkness, disintegration, evil, the strengthening of the me. We're familiar with the various forms of acquisition, both individually and as groups, but we have never tried the way of love, and we don't even know what it means. Love is not possible so long as there is a thinker, the center of the me. Realizing all this, what is one to do? Surely the only thing that can bring about a fundamental change, a creative, psychological release, is everyday watchfulness, being aware from moment to moment of our motives, the conscious as well as the unconscious. When we realize that disciplines, beliefs, ideals only strengthen the me and are therefore utterly futile, when we are aware of that from day to day, see the truth of it, do we not come to the central point when the thinker is constantly separating himself from his thought, from his observations, from his experiences? So long as the thinker exists apart from his thought, which he is trying to dominate, there can be no fundamental transformation. So long as the me is the observer, the one who gathers experience, strengthens himself through experience, there can be no radical change, no creative release. That creative release comes only when the thinker is the thought. But the gap can't be bridged by any effort. When the mind realizes that any speculation, any verbalization, any form of thought only gives strength to the me, when it sees that as long as the thinker exists apart from thought, there must be limitation, the conflict of duality. When the mind realizes that, then it is watchful, everlastingly aware of how it is separating itself from experience, asserting itself, seeking power. In that awareness, if the mind pursues it ever more deeply and extensively, without seeking an end, a goal, there comes a state in which the thinker and the thought are one. In that state, there is no effort. There's no becoming. There is no desire to change. In that state, the me is not, for there is a transformation which is not of the mind. It is only when the mind is empty that there's a real possibility of creation. But I don't mean this superficial emptiness which most of us have. Most of us are superficially empty, and it shows itself through the desire for distraction. We want to be amused, so we turn to books, to the radio, we run to lectures, to authorities. The mind is everlastingly filling itself. I'm not talking about that emptiness which is thoughtlessness. On the contrary, I am talking of the emptiness which comes through extraordinarily thoughtfulness, when the mind sees its own power of creating illusion and goes beyond it. Creative emptiness is not possible so long as there is the thinker who is waiting, watching, observing, in order to gather experience, in order to strengthen himself. Can the mind ever be empty of all symbols, of all words with their sensations, so that there is no experiencer who is accumulating? Is it possible for the mind to put aside completely all the reasonings, the experiences, the impositions, authorities, so that it is in a state of emptiness? You won't be able to answer this question naturally. It is an impossible question for you to answer because you don't know. You have never tried. But if I may suggest, listen to it. Let the question be put to you. Let the seed be sown, and it will bear fruit if you really listen to it, if you don't resist it. It's only the new that can transform, not the old. If you pursue the pattern of the old, any change is a modified continuity of the old. There's nothing new in that. There is nothing creative. The creative can come into being only when the mind itself is new. And the mind can renew itself only when it is capable of seeing all its own activities, not only at the superficial level, but deep down. When the mind sees its own activities, it's aware of its own desires, demands, urges, pursuits, the creation of its own authorities, fears. When it sees itself, when it sees in itself the resistance created by discipline, by control, and the hope which projects beliefs, ideals. When the mind sees through, it is aware of this whole process. Can it put aside all these things and be new, be creatively empty? You will find out whether it can or cannot only if you experiment without having an opinion about it, without wanting to experience that creative state. If you want to experience it, you will. But what you experience is not creative emptiness. It's only a projection of desire. If you desire to experience the new, you are merely indulging in illusion. But if you begin to observe, to be aware of your own activities from day to day, from moment to moment, watching the whole process of yourself as in a mirror, then as you go deeper and deeper, you will come to the ultimate question of this emptiness, in which alone there can be the new. Truth, God, or what you will, is not something to be experienced. For the experiencer is the result of time, the result of memory, of the past. And so long as there is the experiencer, there cannot be reality. There's reality only when the mind is completely free from the analyzer, from the experiencer and the experienced. Then you will find the answer. Then you will see that the change comes without your asking, that the state of creative emptiness is not a thing to be cultivated. It is there. It comes darkly, without any invitation. Only in that state is there a possibility of renewal, newness, revolution.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm.
So it's interesting. This was published in 1954,
Mhm.
and I think it may be one of his first mentioning of witnessing. He doesn't use that word here, but the watching is typically what we connote with our use of the term witnessing. Watching moment by moment, the mind in operation,
Or choiceless awareness.
or choiceless awareness.
So not a reactive awareness,
Mm-hmm.
a choiceless awareness,
Mm-hmm.
without any judgment, without
Mhm.
any opinion, just seeing. Mhm.
So this was his answer to the question, what is the power, the creative energy that brings about that revolution? And how is it to be realized?
So when he says the mind, it needs the space, the emptiness for the new to happen. What is that emptiness? He said it wasn't the emptiness when we tried to distract ourselves,
Right.
to stop the chatter, so we distract ourselves. He didn't.
No, it's the emptiness that is there.
Right.
That is there when the distractions are eliminated, or when the distractions no longer have the power over your attention. That,
When he said thinking,
say again,
can you hear me? Is
very weakly, Hugo.
Is our volume up?
Yes.
that better?
Go ahead, Hugo.
Is that better?
A little bit,
It's
not
a little
much.
muffled.
Huh. I don't know what the heck is wrong with this thing. Can you hear me all right?
Try.
Now, yeah,
try.
talk loud.
Okay. All right. When he's talking about thinking, and where does the thinking come from? The thinking comes from thought. So what is the distinction between thought and thinking?
Well, thinking is the movement of thought. Thoughts
Okay.
move, right?
Okay, yeah, okay, that I understand. That I understand. Because there again, it goes back to the old problem of that, yes, all of this, what he said, of course, there's no equivocation about it. But the thing is that I have a problem distinguishing at times between what I need to know and how to separate that from part of the psychological part that's messing me up.
Mhm.
Because there are times when, you become emotionally involved with something that I think for me, it has to be a distinction between this is something that I have to accept. That's what it is. It's a rock. It's not a pail of water. Not create an illusion about it, which is part of the problem. So how do you at some point arrive at the point where you can distinguish between the psychological part that is the problem with the ego and the non-psychological part that I don't know how else to express it, but it's a function of the ego, or maybe it's not, but it's valuable information that something has to hold on to it. And it's held on in thought. It has to be. But
Well,
in the sense, because he states over and over again about everything in thought is of the past.
right.
Not all bad. Some of it you need.
Yes.
So,
Of course.
so how do you make that distinction? How can you how can I help myself at times get out of the mess of trying to realize that I'm dealing with something psychological that I have to deal with, and it's not something that is that I need in my deal. I have to learn. I have to remember how to say words to communicate with you.
Yes. Yeah. But then that's the psychological is the reactive mind, the mind that
Comments.
yes, that's struggling with something or has a comment or a criticism,
Editorializes.
it's not just an openness and receiving of the what is. It's actually interpreting what is based on its own conditioning and its own experiences. So that's the me. And that's why he was saying, if we're able to see that that me is made up of the same process of thought, that whatever it is we're experiencing in that moment. So in other words, we hear something, and let's say there's a reaction of fear. That which reacted to the fear is the same. It's the thought that produced the fear, and it's the thought that produced the reaction to the fear as the me. But when one hears something and we don't even label it fear, where there is truly just a witnessing, well, I'll use his word, a choiceless awareness, an awareness of what is being heard without the me, then how can there possibly be a reaction? There's just a witnessing of what is. And in that witnessing of what is, there's also the answer to the situation, if the situation is problematic. When there is a situation and we struggle over it with all kinds of emotions, we don't have clarity over what to do, how to handle what's going on. However, with the absence of the me, with the presence of choiceless awareness, there is a clarity. And in that clarity, there is the answer to what is needed. Even if the answer is, there's nothing to be done right now. Or the answer is, yes, I have to call the doctor, or I have to make an appointment is needed to be made. There's a clarity as to how to proceed. When the psychological me is involved, there is usually very little clarity. If the situation is fraught with some anxiety, or if problematic in some way, or stressful in some way, even the fact that the response is stressful, that's from the me too. That's the me that's responding, right? It's not seeing the what is of the moment with clarity.
Yeah, I understand that part of it. I mean, that's perfectly clear because as I understand it, any thought, not any, all thoughts that I have are of the past.
Yes.
So, there's a big content of material in that consciousness, the totality of my consciousness. And at times it gets, for me anyhow, it gets difficult to distinguish between, what is psychological and what isn't. And
Hold
I mean,
on. Well,
struggle.
It's the reaction.
Ugo. So listen, all the thoughts, all the chattering in your head that's
Right.
about you, your hopes, your dreams, your fears, That's all the ego busying itself with nonsense.
Okay.
So if I find a table on the side of the road and I look, oh, that's a nice table, but it's got a bad leg. So I look at it, I say, oh, well, my memory goes to work and I say, I fixed tables like that before. I know how to do that. I remember the kind of glue I used. I remember the process that I went through. I take the table home. I'm totally immersed in fixing it. Everything I'm doing can be traced to memory and muscle memory and cognitive memory because I remember the glue, the process, the tools that I used, and I sit back and it's all finished. And and now the job is done. The cognitive function of my mind served me well. I have a nice finished new table. If I sit there and I say, you know what? I should really do more. I should go around picking up old junk and open a shop. I could probably make a lot of money doing that. Now my ego is taking over. Or if I sit there and I say, you know, it never comes out as good as I thought it was. I still see where the seam is too wide. Damn it. I should have used the different grade of sand, but now I'm back. I'm in my critical cell. So as soon as I'm out of the reality of the moment of what I'm actually needing my cognitive function to do, as soon as I walk away from that, as soon as I start trotting away from the project into the what if or what could be, now the me is starting to have its field day.
Yeah, because what's happening is that you're out of the moment once you start
That's right.
thinking
That's
about
right.
something.
You're out of,
I'm out of the moment.
Right, right,
that's
right. Yeah.
So Paul, would you describe that as would you describe your scenario as creative emptiness then? I've never really seen non-dualists use those two words together. And this is a first for me to see
yeah,
JK or anyone talk about creative emptiness, which I guess to me it seems it's just choiceless awareness is what it is.
right.
Yeah.
That's what it is.
But I
Yeah.
think he's,
Well,
I think JK points to a little bit more than that. I think what he's saying is that that creativeness can only occur with empty in a state of emptiness. You can't be creative and bring any aspects or any traces of the ego with you,
Right.
because any trace of that interferes with being present to the moment and being able to understand and judge the moment as it is.
Well,
Just
and
being able to see what's there and to be able to see what 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 is actually there without any part of the ego interfering with judging it, which is what I
yes,
unfortunately like to
yes.
do.
So that's choiceless awareness.
That's it. That's it.
That's choiceless awareness.
Absolutely.
You know, it's so interesting because in all the teaching, fundamentally, it all seems to come down to the ending. I'm not saying this right, but how do we break up, as he said, the breakup of this psychological me? See, I thought these few paragraphs where you were reading were really so important because he's pointing to what's essential. When he says empty mind, it's empty of the me. And in that emptiness of the me is where true creativity is born, where newness is born. And then he's saying, well, but how do we do this? How is this to happen? And then he's saying, by watching, by witnessing the actions of the me in our daily life.
okay, well, I have a question. So when I'm fixing that table and I am totally immersed in the process of doing it, and while I'm doing it, my mind is not thinking anything else. I'm not thinking in the past and I'm not projecting ahead. I'm totally immersed in what I'm doing. I think that's creative emptiness.
Yep. Oh, I agree. I've experienced that. I mean,
Right.
I get involved with some complicated stuff, not so much now anymore, but and you've got to be there. You've got to be pretty much totally there to know what you're doing. You're operating dangerous machinery. You're operating complicated stuff.
Yeah,
You've got to really be there.
Right.
And you know, you hold off whatever anxiety or whatever upset you had previous to the work and so on and so forth until you're finished. Then you can get upset. Then you can start throwing tools around the shop.
That's right. That's right. But in that moment of doing that, there's
Right.
no ego
Right.
at work. There's just being one with the project at hand, being one with the task at hand.
well, but then there is no longer an observer and an observed.
Right. You
Then,
are the observer. You are it.
no. See, the observer is not there then,
Yeah.
because
It's
see,
the one.
there's no me. If there is no me, there's no observer.
That's
And
There's no
it's
thought.
not split off from that which observed. It's a one movement. It's just a fully presence. It's full presence
Mhm.
in the now.
There's no thought involved. It's just what's happening. There's no thought process in that state of when you get involved. I think the thinking itself, you're not aware of thinking. It just whatever's happening is what's needed to fix the table, if you will. And
Yes.
it doesn't allow any other. It doesn't. There's no room for anything else.
That's right. There's no room for anything else.
Well, you could say thought is being used, but there's no thinker.
Okay.
Right.
Right.
All right.
That's
Okay.
right.
Right.
So,
That's
Yeah.
so he
right.
says in the reading, the observer is the observed, right?
Yeah.
Is that the next step is then there is only observing.
That's
If
right.
the
That's
observer
right.
is
Only
the observed,
awareness. That's
they
right.
cancel that out and it's just observing happening.
Yes,
Mhm.
That's it.
that's it.
The
That's
observed is created by the mind. I mean, the observer to the observed. There's always observing, but then we add something to it. We grow up learning that you have to you have to get to you learn that the table is over there. That there's a separation between what you see and how you interpret that. I can't really explain it properly, but you don't. The fact that you are not part of whatever you're seeing is just created by the mind. Because I don't know how to explain this, but somehow I got the understanding about there's a tree over there, but the tree is here.
well,
Well, without it being here, it can't be over there. And that separation creates creates this problem that we're having with dealing with, you know, present awareness.
well, but what is it like then? Without, if you don't label something, if you don't label a tree, isn't there just a oneness of the seeing? Isn't there just a fullness of seeing, of being? It's not that you become the tree,
No,
but there's no longer that division, because the moment I labeled it, especially oak tree, now I've made that separation. Now, at some point, I'm going to have to do that if I want to plant a tree. I'm going to say I need some seeds for an oak tree. But when one is fully in the present, and this is what the exercise really is how am I to be fully, how is one to be fully in the present without the separation that the me creates? How is that to happen? What needs to happen here so that I can be fully present with you, with the tree, with my work, to be fully present?
I can
Yeah.
answer that question. No movement of thought. When there is no movement of thought, I'm fully present. Awareness flowers. Awareness shines. As soon as thought moves, not thought needed to fix the table, or thought needed to
Drive the car.
or balance my checkbook, or go on the internet. Not that thought. But as soon as thought moves about me and the past, or about me and the present,
Or the
future, awareness dims. So it's the movement of thought that dims my presence of being.
Yes.
So the answer there, Paul, is just to be aware of the movement of thought. It's not that you
He's telling us.
cancel it.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's what this whole thing was about, right?
That's right. Just awareness without any reaction.
Yep.
And unfortunately, most of us are enthralled with the movement of thought. It entertains us all day.
But we identify with it.
Yeah, well,
and that's why he said the thinker is the thought.
Right. That's why you always see these pictures on book covers or on the internet or wherever of some guru in silhouette sitting in the yoga position, looking out at infinity, and there's a bright haze around his head. Well, the message is he's sitting there and there's no movement of thought. He's pure awareness, pure beingness in the moment, pure presence. Sat Chit Ananda.
You might be able to do that with meditation.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
However, he's now saying here, it's not just when you sit in meditation.
No, I wasn't meaning to imply that. I'm just saying that's the way it's pictured.
Yes. So it's as we move through the day.
Right.
Yeah, that's when meditation occurs. There's a little booklet that's put out by the Krishnamurti organization, and it's all filled with excerpts from all of the speeches that J.K. had dealing strictly with meditation, and it's outstanding. It really is great to look at it and see what he says is meditation. More or less, he's saying, really, you want to be in a meditative state throughout the day, and watch yourself. That's meditation. That's the totality of meditation.
That's right.
Right.
Everything else is a fragmentation of it.
That's right.
Chip, you're quiet. Still here?
Yeah, I see you, Chip.
Yeah, I'm here. I'm just listening to you guys.
Okay.
Are you taking notes?
I was wondering if anything particularly grabbed you.
Yeah, I just think the whole premise is wrong, so I don't feel particularly grabbed by it. But
Okay.
because I feel like I feel like we start with the premise that everything, let's say, is awareness or consciousness, right? There's only one. And so all our experiences in life are basically manifestations of thought. And so he has this whole thing where he talks about thought like it's this, this evil component. And I don't really think that's what it is. I mean, I recognize that egoic thought is a huge is a huge problem. But I think that thought, as I've said many times, thought is the building blocks of creation, basically. And so I just see it very, very differently than the way he
Well,
talks
but
about it.
Chip, if you acknowledge that egoic thought is a huge problem,
That's what he's talking
yeah,
about.
and we set that aside, that's what he's talking about. Uh, the rest of what he has to say is not around thought and its constructive use. What issue would you have with that?
No, I don't. I just feel like it's such a it's not clearly, he doesn't clearly delineate. And as a result of clearly delineating, I've listened over the years to these conversations, and as a result of not clearly delineating, it's that idea that, like I said, that thought is the enemy. And I think that's not really the way we are able to learn to enjoy our lives,
Well, hold
which for
on.
me is, yeah, okay.
So if we don't label it as the enemy and we just say egoic thought causes a lot of personal misery for people, are you okay with that formulation? Do you see true?
Yes, I completely agree with that.
Okay,
Absolutely.
okay.
It's that fundamental construct of the ego that basically is the misery making process, you know.
Right,
Because the ego is the notion of a separate self, and
right.
that's the illusion, that's the lie,
That,
you know.
right.
Or
And
or
what's
the
the
or
ego constructed of?
the ego is thought.
That's right. That's what
But
he.
but yeah, but the ego is thought, but so is a tree, or so is, the sun, or so, I mean, all these things are thought constructs,
But
I'm not so
not.
sure that I agree with that completely, that the ego is thought. I mean, the way I understand it is that thought is a process whereby the human brain or the mind or whatever you want to call it has a way of recording what happens, its experience into memory.
Right.
And that's what your conscious, that's the content of your conscious. So there's stuff in there that's not so good, and there's stuff in there that we need, which we've discussed. So I don't think I could completely condemn the basket of thought, but I think it's something that one has to understand, which is a bad word in some people because you either know it or you don't know it. But I don't know about that. But I think that if you look at thought as a big basket of all your experiences and so on and so forth, and then try to get an understanding of how that can be floored and how the psychological aspects of our living is the part that really gives us, most of us, a lot of problems. But so, anyhow, well, I shut up for a while, Paula. Okay.
Well, look, I think what's important here, let me just see if I can find what Paul read. Revolution. And he's talking about psychological revolution, right? This psychological creative revolution in which the me is not comes only when the thinker and the thought are one, when there is no duality, such as the thinker controlling thought. And I suggest it is this experience alone that releases the creative energy, which in turn brings about a fundamental revolution in the mind, the breaking up of the psychological me. That's essential. That's essential. That does not eliminate functional thought or creative thought. It eliminates the thoughts, the experiences, the images of this separate, permanent center that we live by and we call the me, that causes us, for the most part, a lot of pain. Now,
Well,
it can bring, I guess, it's open in moments to pure joy, but usually when one knows pure joy, there is no thought. It's just what is in the moment. You might then say, oh, I enjoyed this. So once again, I'm bringing in the me. But in that pure moment, there's joy.
perhaps
The breaking up of the psychological me. I just think that it's a fantastic challenge. And I see, you can see where this me, there is no permanent center because it is made up of our thoughts, and thoughts keep changing. So where is this permanent center, which is the me? That's what that's what he's pointing to.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because I think I when you first were speaking right now, I agreed with the first part, but I think you kind of drift into this other area where thought brings about it's really that simple. It's really this it's the me that's the whole problem. You
Right.
know, and it's that simple. But the joy and the vibrancy of the world and of creation we experience through thought. You know, whether it's a beautiful sunset or if it's the sun. The sun is a construct of thought. You know, these things, everything in creation is a thought. And so I totally agree with what you said. We're
Yeah,
totally in agreement about the
yeah.
psychological, the me. That's the me is the problem, and it begins and it ends with that. If you are able to recognize that the me doesn't really exist, you
Hmm.
know, it's that simple. But at the same time, don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Recognize that when we listen to a beautiful poem or something, right?
Yes.
Or a beautiful piece of music.
Yeah.
We're experiencing these things through the realm of thought.
How so?
And
How so? Why so?
because be,
Why?
because that's because that's the only construct that there is in creation. There's
Hmm.
nothing there's nothing that you can point to in creation that is not a thought. What could you give me an illustration of something in creation that's not a thought?
When one hears a beautiful piece of music, now the notes are definitely written down via thought, but that which created those notes are the manifestation of the creativity, of the creation of let's say some music, melody. That was not a thought. That
Yeah.
is something that comes, that is something that that appears in awareness, which then gets manifested as notes for music. But when one hears that music, one does not hear it with thought. What it is heard, there isn't even a me that hears it.
Yeah,
There-
see,
There's something else. There's that pure awareness. It's touching that consciousness here, and that consciousness there becomes one. And there is no separation. At that moment, there is no separation. And that's the same thing when we see a sunset or we see beauty of any kind of a flower. If we didn't name it and were able to be with it,
Well,
that's not thought.
isn't that another way of saying, well, Chip, you asked for an example. What about the natural world that surrounds us? The mountains and the oceans. They're not a product of thought.
yeah, see, we're talking about two different. We're using the word differently. You're
Right.
using when you use the word thought, you're talking about egoic thought.
That's right.
That's the construct for you. When I talk about thought, I'm talking about the forming force of creation. You know, the sun is a construct within consciousness. I'm not talking about it. It's not an egoic construct. And I agree with you. I'm one of the a long time ago, I recognized that intellectual thought and egoic thought was illusory. It was a trap. It was never going to get me there. It was never going to be able to express reality. You know, it was only very limited construct. So that's the problem that we're having here when we're communicating is we have a different notion or a different idea about what the word thought is. You know, for me, these like the sun, all these things within creation, they're constructs of thought. That's why when sometimes people talk about there's only consciousness. Yeah, there's only consciousness, but how does it manifest? Consciousness manifests through thought. And you have the construct of the sun, you have the construct of the earth, you have the construct of the oceans. You know, these are all ideas within the mind of of life, you know, within the mind of that consciousness, basically. And
But what is thought? Walter, what is thought? What is it?
thought is a thought is a vibratory construct that we basically use to construct reality. You know,
Okay, well,
when we look,
Yes.
if that's
just
what you
yeah.
I'm
So
sorry.
just look for let's look for example. Just look like I walk down to the beach and I see a car there, right? There's a car parked at the beach. I'm walking to the bay. That car, I can tell that car has been made by some sort of intelligence, right? It's quite clear that there's an intelligence behind that. There's a forming force behind that car, right? Can we agree on that? A forming force behind the car?
The car is a product of thought. Yes.
Yes. Of
Yes,
But
yes, good. Okay.
but
course.
Right.
yeah, but the bay that you're walking to is not.
No, well, that's you see, that's the difference that we're having. That's where we're diverging in our
Right,
construct here.
right.
See, for me, the car and the bay are just two manifestations of the same thing. I don't see the natural world as separate and apart from the car. The car is the car is an infantile level event compared to the bay or the ocean or other levels of reality. But it's
Mhm.
still a construct of thought nonetheless.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
For
Chip,
me,
I,
that's
it's one
in a Buddhist
problem.
sense, in a
The
Buddhist sense, I
problem,
would call these all forms. Your thoughts, the car, the bay, the mountains, the trees, these are all forms. They have boundaries. And what isn't that is consciousness then, or emptiness, as the Buddhists would say,
Awareness,
Right, but
choiceless.
what we're
or awareness.
what
Yeah.
we're what we're learning to do, what we're learning to do is we're learning to use these constructs to basically have our play in life, you know. We make a house, we make a bed, you know, we make certain kinds of food to eat. All these things that we're doing, we're learning how to manipulate, you know, and to
Hold on,
form.
Chip. So then
Yeah.
you're saying that the essence of reality is a vibrational pattern called thought.
The essence of reality, the essence of creation is vibration.
Yeah, okay. The essence of creation is a
Is
vibrational pattern, and we've called that thought.
Which is appearing in what? Awareness.
the
It all
yeah.
appears in awareness. What
Well,
is
well,
awareness?
yes, there's two things. There's awareness, which is basically you can have awareness without having creation, right? You can have awareness in
Yes,
stillness,
right?
right? So that's the foundation, that's the backdrop,
That's right.
stillness.
That's right.
Okay?
That's
Then then you basically, you know, the conductor hits the wand and the orchestra starts playing, right? So vibrations start, and that's basically creation. Creation is the vibratory realm, is a vibratory realm, and that vibratory realm is organized by thought. When somebody writes a piece of music, it's
yeah,
it's organized.
of
and
course.
it's and it's not, and I totally agree with you that I'm not talking about intellectual thought. I totally agree with you that these great works of art clearly supersede the intellectual constructs of thought, you know, the egoic constructs of thought. But if I see a chair, or if I see a car, or if I see a bay or a world, they are not different. In other words, the car is not different than the bay. It's just simply another construct of thought within the vibratory realm of creation.
Well, I'm
Okay.
getting over here because I've got a slightly different aspect of this thing. I mean, you start out when you're born with senses. You got five of them, basically, right? Okay. And as you pop out of the womb, that item, the girl or boy that pops out, is starting to have experiences. And it's the ability of the brain to remember the experiences that it has, that it creates a content for its consciousness. And that's where everything comes from. And I think the problem comes in is that we're taught to separate a great deal of stuff. When you're a little person, you don't have an idea that's not self. Everything is self in a sense. You don't have an idea of me, I, mine. You grow up being instructed in that. And also, the other thing is, like we were talking about, you've got to learn a great deal of things to be successful in life,
Okay.
like how to use a fork and how to use
No.
a table and all the rest of that stuff. And
Okay.
that's part of memory.
So now listen, if we bring it down to how
Right.
it affects us in our everyday life, because that's where this begins and ends. How does it affect us in our everyday life? What affects us most in our everyday life is this psychological me, right?
Yep.
So the question we have, and what Krishnamurti was pointing to here in this little talk, how do we break up this psychological me so that we can be fully present in the moment, receptive to the what is, without the feelings that come from confusion, from contradiction, from fear? How do we break that up so that we can live lives that are peaceful and joyful and compassionate, and at the same time, very practical. That's our most important question. Because if we take away all the concepts and we just stay with what is, and the what is the sense I am, and what am I?
Okay, well, so that's keeping the focus on the problems that this egoic ego causes for us in our everyday lives, which is what Kay was trying to point us to, as you just said. And Chip, you introduced a new phrase, the vibratory realm of creation. I guess I'm going to have to Google that. Okay, guys, we're coming to an end. Until next time, okay?
Yep.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks a
Ciao.
lot, Moschetta, for doing this.
Thank
Great
Yeah,
you.
seeing
thank you very much.
See you, Chip.
Take care. Night all.
Ciao.